I don't think I'll ever forget that day, though some days I wish I could. There's a comfort in not knowing, in being blissfully ignorant about the strange things that might be lurking just beyond the tree line. But once you've seen what I've seen, there's no going back. It started innocently enough, as these things always seem to do, with me taking one of the horses out for a routine ride along the trails that wove through the dense woods near my childhood home. Growing up in rural Indiana, surrounded by miles of untamed wilderness, you develop a certain relationship with the land. You trust it, but you also respect it because it's indifferent to your survival. What I didn't realize that day was how utterly indifferent it could be, or how little I knew about what shared those woods with me. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of a sound. At first it was barely noticeable, just the faintest rustling in the thick blackberry bushes that lined the trails. It could have been anything, I told myself. A deer, a stray dog, maybe even a raccoon, but then it became unmistakable. There was something moving out there, shadowing my every step. I stopped the horse, straining to hear, and for a moment there was silence. My heart pounded as I scanned the underbrush, the brittle leaves crackling under the horse's hooves as she shifted nervously beneath me. I couldn't see anything, just endless layers of bramble and shadow. But the feeling that I was being watched was as sharp and distinct as the autumn air. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. People in this part of the country were used to the woods playing tricks on them. Shadows would shift and stretch in the dappled light, making ordinary things appear sinister. The wind could twist through the trees and mimic human whispers, carrying an eerie cadence that raised the hairs on the back of your neck. But this wasn't the woods playing tricks. Whatever was out there wasn't an illusion. I could feel it, and more than that, the horse could feel it. Animals always know. The mare's ears flicked back and forth, and she let out a low, nervous snort. That's when I saw it, or at least the briefest flash of movement. Something black darting between the trees. The first thing that struck me about the figure was its size. It wasn't just large, it was massive, far bigger than anything I'd ever seen moving through the forest before. At first I thought it was a man, maybe one of the hunters who occasionally ventured out this way. But no hunter could move like that, silently weaving through the dense undergrowth without making a sound. My heart began to race as I spurred the mare forward, desperate to put some distance between myself and whatever was following me. The trail ahead opened up into a sandy clearing, and for a brief moment I thought I was safe. But then I heard it. A heavy, deliberate footfall, far too loud to belong to a human. I froze, craning my neck to look back, and that's when I saw it. Standing at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by the shadows of the trees, was a creature that defied all logic. It was covered in thick black hair that gleamed dully in the fading sunlight, and its eyes, God, its eyes were unlike anything I'd ever seen. They weren't the eyes of an animal. They were cold, calculating, and filled with a malice so intense it made my stomach turn. It wasn't just looking at me. It was sizing me up, its gaze filled with a predatory hunger that made every instinct in my body scream to run. Before I could fully process what I was seeing, the creature moved. It dropped to all fours, its long arms propelling it forward with terrifying speed. My mare reared up, her shrill cry piercing the stillness of the woods, and I clung to the saddle horn for dear life. There was no time to think, no time to plan. I let her have her head, urging her to run, and she took off like a shot. The world blurred around me as we tore through the woods, branches whipping against my face and tearing at my clothes. But even as fast as she was, I could hear it behind us, the heavy thud of its footsteps growing louder with each passing second. I don't know how long we ran. Time seemed to stretch and warp in those frantic moments, my fear compressing every second into an eternity. I glanced over my shoulder once, just once, and what I saw nearly made me lose my grip on the reins. The creature was right behind us, its massive form barreling through the underbrush with an unnatural grace. It wasn't just running on two legs. It was using its arms too, its long fingers clawing at the ground to propel itself forward. It reminded me of an ape, but there was something fundamentally wrong about the way it moved, something that made my skin crawl. The mare was frothing at the bit, her body slick with sweat as she pushed herself to the limit. I could feel her muscles straining beneath me, every fiber of her being focused on one thing: survival. And then, just when I thought we might have a chance, she stumbled. It was only for a split second, but it was enough. The creature lunged, its claws raking the air where we'd just been, and I felt the cold sting of panic flood my veins. We burst out of the woods and into the pasture that bordered our property, the fence line looming ahead like a lifeline. I urged the mare forward, praying she had enough left in her to clear it. She didn't. The impact of the fence breaking was like a gunshot, the wooden posts splintering under the force of her body as we crashed through. I hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of me as pain exploded across my side. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I could do was lie there, staring up at the sky as the world spun around me. And then I heard it. The sound of the creature slowing, its heavy breathing filling the air as it came to a stop just beyond the fence line. I could hear its breathing deep, guttural and menacing. Each exhalation sounded like a snarl, low and rumbling, vibrating through the cold evening air. My body screamed at me to move, to do something. But I was paralyzed, lying there in the dirt with the taste of blood and panic thick in my mouth. It was there, just on the other side of the fence. The creature stood at the edge of the broken posts, its massive frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. I didn't need to look to know it was watching me. I could feel its eyes boring into me, unrelenting and full of hatred. Somehow I managed to push myself onto my elbows, my vision swimming as I tried to focus. My mare had made it to the barn, her frantic whinnies echoing in the distance, but I knew I couldn't count on her for help. She was as terrified as I was, maybe more. With every ounce of strength I had left, I forced myself to my feet, clutching at the sharp pain in my ribs where I'd hit the ground. My legs felt like jelly, but adrenaline kept me upright as I staggered toward the house. The creature growled, low and menacing, and I knew I only had seconds before it came after me. My hand was on the back door when I heard it move. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, a mix of snapping branches, claws scraping against wood, and the unmistakable thud of its heavy body hitting the ground. I turned, unable to stop myself, and there it was, leaping over the splintered fence with terrifying ease. It landed on all fours, its muscles rippling under its dark fur as it straightened to its full height. For the first time I got a good look at it, and I felt my stomach twist in a way that nearly made me vomit. Its face was like a nightmare come to life, a grotesque blend of ape and human, with a wide, flat nose and a mouth full of sharp yellow teeth. Its eyes were the worst, though. They weren't animal eyes. They were intelligent, aware, and filled with a cold, predatory rage that made me want to curl up and disappear. I stumbled backward, fumbling for the doorknob, and slammed the door shut just as it lunged. The impact shook the house, and I screamed, throwing the deadbolt into place and grabbing the nearest chair to brace the handle. The next few minutes were a blur of panic and frantic movement. I ran through the house, locking every door and window, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the locks, and every shadow outside seemed to shift and move, like the creature was already inside, watching me. My boys were upstairs, and I shouted for them to stay put, to lock their doors and not come out until I said it was safe. My voice was hoarse, cracked from the force of my fear, but they didn't argue. They knew better. The creature didn't give up. It circled the house, its heavy footfalls crunching against the gravel driveway, and every so often it would stop and slam its body against the walls. Each impact sent tremors through the house, the sound of splintering wood filling the air like gunfire. My heart felt like it was going to explode. This wasn't like the Sasquatch we'd grown up with. Those things were terrifying, sure, but they were predictable. They didn't tear down fences or attack you outright. They didn't radiate pure malice like this thing did. Whatever it wasn't just a creature. It was something else, something wrong. I grabbed my rifle from the closet, my hands trembling as I loaded it. The feel of the cold metal against my skin gave me a small sense of control, but I knew it was a false comfort. This thing wasn't scared of us. It didn't care about boundaries or guns. It wanted something, and it wasn't going to stop until it got it. I could hear it outside, raking its claws against the walls, its guttural growls vibrating through the air like a storm building on the horizon. I tried to steady my breathing, to focus, but the fear was too much. It wrapped around me like a vice, squeezing tighter with every second that passed. Hours passed like that. The creature didn't leave, but it didn't break in either. It just stayed out there, circling, waiting, its heavy breathing and low growls a constant reminder that it was still watching. Every so often I'd hear a tapping on the windows, a slow, deliberate sound that sent chills racing down my spine. It wasn't random. It wasn't just testing the glass. It was communicating, letting me know it was still there, that it could come in any time it wanted. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. The boys stayed locked in their room, whispering to each other in voices I couldn't quite make out. And I sat in the living room, my rifle across my lap, staring at the front door. Every noise, every shadow sent my heart racing, and by the time the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the curtains, I was on the verge of collapse. I'd never been so grateful to see daylight in my life. When I finally opened the door, stepping outside with my rifle held tight against my shoulder, the yard was eerily still. The broken fence, the blood-stained dirt where my dog had been attacked, the deep gouges in the side of the house, it all looked worse in the light. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that even though I couldn't see it, the creature was still out there, hiding in the shadows just beyond the tree line. The forest seemed darker than it should have, the towering oaks and thick underbrush closing in like a living, breathing thing. I wanted to run, to pack up my boys and leave, but I knew it wasn't that simple. This was our home, and whatever that thing was, it wasn't going to scare us away. Over the next few days, things only got worse. I set up cameras around the property, hoping to catch a glimpse of the creature, but they never worked. The footage would be blurry, distorted, or just blank, as if the creature could somehow sense them and avoid them entirely. The nights were the hardest. It would return like clockwork, pacing around the house, tapping on the windows and raking its claws against the walls. The boys started sleeping in my room, too scared to stay upstairs on their own, and I couldn't blame them. I didn't feel safe anywhere in the house, not even during the day. The animals were the first to notice the change. The deer that usually grazed in the fields behind the house vanished, their absence creating a deafening silence that only added to the tension. Even the birds stopped singing, their usual morning chorus replaced by an eerie stillness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The only animals that didn't leave were the coyotes, and even they seemed more cautious, slinking through the underbrush with their tails low and their ears flattened. It was like they knew something was out there, something they couldn't fight or escape. The nights grew longer, the darkness deeper, and the sense of dread that hung over the house became almost unbearable. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps, and the constant tapping on the windows felt like a taunt, a reminder that the creature was still out there, waiting. I didn't know how much more we could take. I didn't know what it wanted or why it was targeting us, but I knew one thing for certain. It wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. By the second week, my nerves were shot. I wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping, and every sound made my body tense like a coiled spring. The boys could see it too, though I tried to hide it from them. Their once curious chatter about the woods and the creatures they'd grown up hearing about had been replaced by hushed whispers and long, fearful silences. Even in daylight, the house felt oppressive, the weight of what was out there pressing in on us from all sides. On the fifth night after the initial attack, it escalated. The tapping on the windows turned into pounding, heavy, deliberate blows that rattled the glass in its frame and sent vibrations through the floor. I grabbed my rifle, my heart pounding as I rushed toward the living room. The pounding stopped the moment I turned on the porch light, but I knew it hadn't gone far. The air felt wrong, thick and electric, like the world itself was holding its breath. I stood there for what felt like hours, the rifle trembling in my hands, my finger hovering over the trigger. The shadows outside the window seemed to shift and writhe, playing tricks on my mind. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure, tall and hulking, moving just beyond the reach of the porch light. It stopped and turned toward me, its glowing eyes catching the light in a way that made my stomach drop. This wasn't like the Sasquatch I'd seen before. Those creatures had an intelligence behind their eyes, a sense of awareness that was almost human. This thing was different. Its eyes were cold, predatory, and filled with an otherworldly malice that made my blood run cold. I didn't wait for it to make the first move. Raising the rifle, I fired into the darkness, the sharp crack of the shot splitting the silence like a thunderclap. The creature let out a guttural snarl, a sound so deep and menacing it shook the windows. For a brief moment, I thought I'd hit it, but then I saw it move, faster than anything that size should have been able to. It disappeared into the trees, its growls fading into the distance, and I was left standing there, trembling, with the acrid smell of gunpowder filling the air. The next morning, I decided something had to change. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. Whatever this creature was, it wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted, or until I forced it to stop. I called my brother, explaining the situation as best I could without sounding completely insane, and he agreed to come out to the property that evening. He brought with him a collection of hunting gear, including a spotlight, trail cameras, and enough firepower to make a small army jealous. We spent the afternoon setting up. Cameras were placed at every corner of the house, their lenses angled to capture as much of the yard as possible. The spotlight was mounted on the porch, its beam powerful enough to cut through the darkest shadows. My brother, ever the pragmatist, sprinkled sulfur along the tree line, a trick he'd learned from an old farmer who swore it kept wild animals at bay. I didn't know if it would work, but at that point, I was willing to try anything. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the woods were swallowed by darkness, we settled in, rifles at the ready, and waited. The air grew colder, the kind of bone-deep chill that made it hard to breathe, and the oppressive silence that followed was almost worse than the pounding and growling had been. It was as if the forest itself had gone still, every living creature holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. And then we heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. My brother shined the spotlight into the trees, the beam cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there. The growl came again, closer this time, and I felt my chest tighten with fear. I raised my rifle, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement, but the darkness seemed impenetrable. When the creature finally revealed itself, it was like something out of a nightmare. It stepped into the beam of the spotlight, its massive frame dwarfing the trees around it. Its fur, matted and dark, glistened in the harsh light, and its eyes burned like embers in the night. It stood on two legs, its muscular body rippling with every step, but its head was distinctly canine, with a long snout and a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. I froze, unable to look away, as it let out a deep guttural snarl that seemed to vibrate through the air. My brother didn't hesitate. He raised his shotgun and fired, the blast echoing through the night, but the creature barely flinched. It lunged forward, its claws digging into the dirt as it charged, and I felt my blood turn to ice. We fired again and again, the sound deafening, but it didn't stop. It was relentless, its speed and strength far beyond anything I'd ever seen. It reached the edge of the yard, and for a moment I thought it was going to break through the sulfur line, but then it stopped. It skidded to a halt just inches from the boundary, its claws raking the ground as it snarled and snapped its jaws. I could see the rage in its eyes, the frustration as it paced back and forth, unable or unwilling to cross the line. My brother and I held our ground, our rifles trained on the creature, but it didn't move any closer. It just stood there, its growls filling the air, until finally it turned and disappeared back into the woods. The next morning we walked the perimeter of the property, searching for any sign of the creature, but the only evidence of its presence was the deep gouges in the ground where it had clawed at the sulfur line. The cameras hadn't captured much, just blurry, distorted images of movement. But the sulfur seemed to have worked, at least for now. The creature didn't return that night or the night after, but I knew better than to think it was gone for good. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after something like that. The boys started sleeping in their own rooms again, and the deer and birds returned to the fields and trees around the house. But I never let my guard down. I kept the cameras running, the spotlight ready, and the rifle by my side, because even though I hadn't seen the creature in weeks, I knew it was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to return. There's a strange kind of peace that comes with living in fear. You learn to adapt, to coexist with the things that terrify you, but you never forget. You never truly feel safe. Every time I step outside, I scan the tree line, half expecting to see those glowing eyes staring back at me. And every night, as I lock the doors and turn off the lights, I whisper a silent prayer that tonight won't be the night it decides to come back.